Hello everybody. So I scored this on eBay. Well, I don't know if I can call it score, but it was $60 US. So I thought the price was reasonable because it is about the price of indie decks. However, after shipping of US $30, it brought the price up for me to $90. And so such as life being in New Zealand. So that's about New Zealand dollars 130. Now that brought this price or cost, I suppose, to about average. I think from what I can see, other people have purchased a copy of this vintage Hoi Polloi recently in the past year or so. Not so much from looking at asking prices, but based on purchase prices in the past few months to a year. So anyway, first I would like to show you the box. Now my setup here is a little bit tight, but hopefully you can see it. I think Lisa of Mindful Tarot some time ago have spoken about various editions of this particular deck. I think she has more than one edition. Now, I'm not familiar with this other than I wanted the Hoi Polloi. I didn't even realize there's a different versions, or at least a couple of different versions of it. So this is one which is in a box that has purple writing the tarot in front of it, and then it has this sort of wooden grain pattern on the box, and the box is very squeezed. I'm not quite sure if this is squeezed during posting or whether it's like this. So this is, the box is made to look like a wooden box, which I thought was a little cute. Didn't quite realize that looking at the picture. The picture wasn't very detailed, but now upon closer inspection, this is what it's trying to do. And then you open it like so. And then you have this booklet here. And then you have two compartments, which didn't hold the stacks very well because, well, this is very old. I mean, this is from the early 70s, so when I received it, the cards were all over the place. And this is the booklet. Now, the ones that I've seen so far have a more vertical box, a purple one that looks more like a board game box, and I think they are designed as such as a board game, unless I'm confusing that with something else, but it is effectively boxed as a board game, and it is an interesting commentary on tarot in the early 70s in terms of production value, in terms of the social conversation around it. So I will not be using this booklet because this is just for collecting purposes. So I think this was produced in New York, and it reminds me of the Albano Weight in 1968 as well. So I'm thinking that 68, early 70s, this is before US Games aggressively pursued their exclusive copyright on the images. You have this variety of the recreation of Pixie's art and Waite's tarot. So this is, I'm just assuming all of you would already know that this is the Hoi Polloi, so I'm sorry if I didn't introduce that earlier. So this is in a pretty good nick, and it says here, 1972 copyright, Hoi Polloi Incorporated, New York City, New York. Copyright means that their copyright was granted, I suppose, in 72, but it doesn't mean that the printing is in 72. So we can only say that this was done in 72 or after. Any of you have any information on this particular edition with the wooden box, not quite wooden box, but a cardboard box that made to look like a wooden box? At least that's the intention. So the cards are in pretty good condition. I have only a few that's a bit creased and marked. And the edges aren't very straight, but this isn't that kind of a deck. So as you can see here, this, I did initially think that, no, I'm not going to keep this because that kind of edges just drive me up the wall. But I have to remind myself the context of the time of this particular, the production of this particular deck. And that is perhaps, other than the crazy neon color that is like you know, like someone with a highlighter, I said, just went to town with it. The color cheered me up, really. I'm not a big fan of the 70s aesthetic sensibilities. I think I grew up as a child in the 70s, and so it's a bit like the 80s. It's very cringeworthy. But, you know, enough distance have passed now between the 70s and where I am now that I'm beginning to be able to look back with a lot of degrees of fondness. And so it's not quite a recreation. I mean, it's a recreation of Pixie's art. What I'm saying is that it's not quite an attempt to reproduce, because it's not drawn exactly the same. It's somewhat a redrawing of it. It's like if someone were to, you know, want to give you an idea of what the original cards, but the original cards aren't available to them. They sort of try to redraw the whole thing and present it to you. So the details aren't the same, but the large majority of what you get the idea. Like, you know, yeah. People call this a clone. I clone is an exact replica from the same DNA, so I would call this a redrawing. You see that there's little creases, but it's of little consequence to me, given that this is perhaps one of the lowest asking prices out there at the time. I could wait for, and you know, you could really. It's just a matter of deciding for yourself how long you're willing to wait, and using that gut feel as to whether this is about as good as it's going to get. So there's some scuffings and age markings to be expected. And this is the first card that I saw in the box, and it's just so wonky that it put me off. And as I said, I was tired. It was a long journey from sunny part of Australia, Queensland, to this winter, glum, dark, wet, windy, cold part of New Zealand. So I was a little bit. And then this package arrived. I opened it, and that Three of Swords is the first one I saw. So I was a bit. See, like this lady here. It's not quite the same. You can see that this particular sensibilities of fashion here is more the 70s rather than the Middle Ages, but the rest is pretty more or less like Pixie's. So it's like someone trying to adapt Pixie's art to feel a little bit more in line with the 70s, which is fair enough, because we're still doing that now, aren't we, in a way? But nowadays we just stop pretending that we have to toe the line according to Pixie's design, and we just go off into our own thing these days, which is liberating. This is almost as if somebody is trying to move away from the Rider-Waite-Smith, but still on the training wheel. I love the bright, crazy colors. So $60 US, people. If any of you manage to get this for lower, do let us know, so that those of you who are hunting for a copy can decide for yourself as to what is a good enough price for you. I thought 60 US was not too bad. It is unfortunate that I have to pay $30 US on top of that for shipping. That's like 45 New Zealand dollars only on shipping. And so you can imagine, you know, buying a $10 item becomes problematic when you have to pay $45 in shipping alone. And this is not uncommon. Those of you in New Zealand who have tried to ship indie decks or anything, really, anything, will be very familiar with shipping costs. The only way not to be slapped with shipping costs is to shop from websites which have a postal and inventory arrangement which allow them to give you free shipping, like Book Depository and New Zealand Game Shop.com, for example, for games, for example. I don't know how they do it. Like New Zealand Game Shop.com actually deliver from the UK, and somehow they managed to give us free shipping. But those guys relies on volume, and because they rely on volume, it means that their variety is very, very limited, like extremely limited. And for some of us, they just don't have what we're looking for. So anyway, the cardstock is like, I want to say typical of early 70s, late 60s New York, but I can't because the only one I have is this and the Albano Weight Terra Production 68. They're both very cardboardy, like it's pieces of cardboard with no core. And so it feels like shuffling pieces of thick cartons, which is not totally unpleasurable. I rather enjoy it. The devil is so ugly. I really dislike. It's just a very unattractive, but I like the pink, so that makes it more palatable to look at. I like the sort of different colorings. So it's in a relatively good nick. I mean, I can't even spot the few cards with dings on them. There's some that are dinged a bit here, and then there's like a round mark, like something round have sat on it for too long, and then one has like a crease mark. But you know, as you can see, we barely notice it as I flip through this. So yes, so I am going to keep this, and I have been shuffling this non-stop. It has that sort of musty smell. And again, I've mentioned, oh, there it is, like that. I've mentioned this before. Sellers of secondhand items seem to be asking for more reasonable prices compared to sellers of vintage tarot decks or collectible tarot decks or sellers of tarot decks, which is understandable. And so tarot decks, antique, vintage, secondhand tarot deck sellers on eBay tend to aim for collectors, while secondhand sellers basically aim to get what is fair. I'm sure they've done a bit of research, and then they just want to move the inventory along. So I highly recommend that you keep waiting and be patient, because there's always more that comes in the market, and B, perhaps look for sellers who are selling general knickknacks, bric-a-brac, and secondhand pre-loved items rather than sellers specializing in tarot. And also, I found, I could be wrong, for certain kind of decks, sellers in Europe generally ask, and books as well, esoteric books, tend to ask for more reasonable prices compared to sellers in the US. I could be wrong. It could be a reflection of the market, and so, you know, demand, supply, that sort of thing. And so if you are shopping internationally, you have a choice. That's the good thing about shopping internationally, you have a choice. Speaking of shipping internationally, I heard that people in Australia, buyers in Australia, can't buy from Amazon US anymore because of taxes. And I have a funny feeling New Zealand is going to follow suit with taxes, so there is that little damage there for online shopping, I think, in the next financial year, which is unfortunate, but that is topic for a different video, and I'll talk about it when the time comes. So that's the Hoi Polloi, and this one here is something else that I'll talk about in a different video. So it's not as smooth as Ryder's Blue Box, which is also somewhat, you know, feels somewhat naked and unlaminated, but it is smooth enough. It is pleasurable enough. The titles are sometimes at the bottom, sometimes at the top. Initially I thought it is the bottom for the majors and the top for the minors, or vice versa, but upon further browsing, it's kind of random, which threw me off a little bit, like that one there, but it doesn't really matter because the back isn't reversible, so I could always see which way is up. So I will talk to you guys later. Bye. Whoops. I'll leave you with the world. How's that? Instead of the Five of Cups.